Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles.
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 239, we're going to talk about socket adapters, socket savers, socket lifters, everything to do with, well, sockets, sort of. Anyways, but first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Well, we just received a fresh order of adapters, and I realized they're probably our number one seller. We often get orders just for adapters, sometimes lots of adapters. So I thought, let's take a quick look at what's available, what they're used for, what they look like. And we got a really weird, crazy adapter to show off.
And some nice tubes that can be run in socket adapters where you can convert one tube type to another.
That's your specialty, Charles. Okay, well, let's start with the most popular adapter we sell. This is a socket saver lifter for an octal tube. So it's just an octal tube in what this is on.
It's a straight through pass through. There's no change of the pin out or anything like that.
Yeah, so this is pin 1 right here. So pin 1 is pin 1 on the bottom. And in the old days, adapters like this were all basically called socket savers, and they were used to preserve the original socket for high volume sockets. So
like on tube testers.
Right, exactly. But on some amps, you were swapping tubes constantly, and you wear out the original socket, which is a major pain in the you-know-what to change.
At least on some of them.
On some of them, yeah. So these days, though, they're not used for that purpose at all. They're basically used to lift a tube above a sunken socket. So a lot of modern amps, because they're PCB based and the socket is actually mounted on a PCB, and because of design topologies and a lack of space, what they end up doing is they put the PCB below the top plate of the chassis, and the socket is so far down that you actually have to push the tube below the top plate. So when you're pushing in, it's not too bad. You can sort of hang on to the base. When you're pulling out, though, you've got to pull on the glass. You've got no choice. There's no way you're going to bring pliers down beside here. And that's a big problem because the all tubes, all octal tubes, and many other types with a plastic base and even a metal base have a bonded bedding compound between the glass and the base.
Essentially sort of a thick glue.
Yep. And it can't be an ultra strong type of fast glue, because what will happen is when the tube expands and contracts as it warms and cools, it'll break that hard bond. So it has to be something that has a little bit of give. So you can't pull on any vintage tube, absolutely never ever, or you'll break that bond. And now Charles is
possibly destroy your tube.
Possibly destroy your tube because you can actually pull the wires, damage the connections. Charles is an expert at re-gluing bases, so that you wouldn't even know he had done it. He does it using the original manufacturer's methodology, and
it's more of a refresh than a re-glue, and it works quite well.
Yeah.
We've got some videos on that if you just look back in our history.
Yeah, so that's why these have become so popular, because there are just so many modern amps with sunken sockets. So this will lift you up. Now, when you're using a socket lifter, you don't put the socket adapter or lifter into the amp first and sink it down there. What you do is you load the tube first like this outside of the amp, and then once it's all loaded, now I'm not going to push this down because I actually need this tube for the next segment, but once it's all assembled, you push the whole thing in together. And then when it's time to change tubes, if you're rolling or replacing a bad tube, you can actually normally just pull the whole thing out as an assembly. Works really well, and yeah. Now, what about miniature 9-pin tubes? Well, the same factory that we buy direct from for these makes these. In fact, this is a version that he made that he improved actually so that we could sell a proper 9-pin adapter. And the factory does excellent work. And
loose bases isn't really an issue with 9 pins, but the issue with a 9-pin is actually getting the pins aligned correctly. You don't want it to come in on a weird angle and sort of slip around these connectors. You can end up bending your pin, damaging it, breaking it off, breaking the glass of the tube. So you really need to be able to see where you're inserting that. And this helps lift it up so you can.
Yeah. And that brings us to the last of the standard adapters we carry. These are all made by Amtata, by the way. One of our best suppliers and manufacturers, just top-notch company, and they're continuously improving their products. So this is a 9-pin adapter to an octal tube. Now, you have to make certain the adapter you're buying or using is the correct one. Not every tube has the same filament voltage or pinout. So it's critical to know what specific tube you're adapting to what specific socket. Let me repeat that. It's critical to know what specific tube you are adapting to what specific socket, or bad things could happen. In our store listings, we specifically tell you what each adapter is for. Okay, so now, these are the standard ones that we carry, but there's all kinds of stuff online that are different and weird and interesting, and we've got one that is just a total freakout. So let's just clear the decks and we'll get it up. Okay, now what the heck is that? Well, there's a gentleman online who has been making these for a while, and this is basically a single triode to 6SN7 adapter.
Or a dual single triode to 6SN7 adapter.
And you might think, what the? And you would be right. But years ago, I picked up a post from somebody who said, these are some of the best sounding half a 6SN7 you've ever heard in your life. And the interesting thing is, these tubes, the CV6 types, and they have a lot of different numbers. They're in the store in one category. So the one version of it is called the 7193 by Kenrad. These are actually Jans.
Yeah, there's the 2C22, the CV6, the E6S8S.
This Hytron, I think, is the
E1148.
Yeah. So, and then the original number, the CV6, which was a British number and stands for common valve. And of course, all of these tubes are actually early radar tubes that go back to the early days of the Second World War, when the British were frantically developing radar. And they ended up with a critical tube that they needed huge numbers in, and they were made in Britain, they were made in the U.S. A number of military manufacturers or military contracts were issued, and they each had their own number for them. So it can be slightly confusing, but all of them are basically the same tube with just some variations in gain level. And of course, the construction variations are numerous. Like the Hytron has a horizontal top plate. That's well worth showing. And the reason for that is because they needed these things to be very low noise. So they actually put the grid input on one side, this side, and you notice I put a red dot, that's the high voltage side. And that's probably the trickiest part about these tubes, is you've got to know how to identify which lead goes where. Now, when we ship these tubes, we mark them. And then, of course, on your adapter, you've got to know which one is the hot one and which one is the grid. And so this is, if you've got space on your amp and you're adventurous and you love the sound of the 6SN7, you can go back to a whole selection of tubes that were made in the 1940s, the very late 1930s into the 40s to the very early 1950s. But the heyday of these tubes was about 1940 to 45. And we have a huge selection of them. The adapters that are available online are not that expensive. It's just a lot of fun. The sonics are, it's like going back to the best of the early 6SN7s. It's the only way I can describe it. You have to hear it. We've got some customers that are absolutely in love with the sound and have bought multiple backups of their favorite versions because they're worried they're going to disappear. And they're right, because years ago when I first discovered this tube, we invested a serious amount of money in inventory. We brought tubes in from all over the world. I even found some World War II, I forget which version of it, sitting in a warehouse in Pakistan.
I think they were Hytron tubes that had been shipped to Britain and then shipped to France and relabeled and boxed there and then shipped to Pakistan.
Yeah. So, it was crazy. And I was a little bit nervous about buying from a seller in Pakistan. But it worked out really well. And we still have some inventory of those tubes left. So, and we have a lot of original boxes, and they're all really cool. But we don't have time to take them out. But we're going to spend just a second, and we're going to load these tubes to show you what they look like, and we'll be right back. Okay, Charles has got actually 2 different CV6 types mounted, and
this is one of the fun things that you can actually do with these tubes, depending on how your amplifier is set up. Now, if you're running, 1/2 of a 6SN7 per channel, don't do this. You're going to end up with 2 different sound profiles, one on each channel.
So you would need a nice close match pair, which we'll provide for you.
But let's say you have 2 gain stages in a row on a 6SN7, or a gain stage and a cathode follower. Well, you can mix and match in that case, but if you have another adapter, you'd want to make sure that you run the same tube in the same spot on that adapter. So you could run something like 2 Kenrads in the front stage and 2 Hytrons in the second. And then you can flip them around if you like.
Yeah, so unlike the 6SN7, in which you've got 2 tubes in one envelope and you basically stuck with whatever you bought, this actually gives you some more flexibility. Though probably for your first tube rolling experience, I would recommend you just use match pairs. But given the response we get back from customers who've been turned on to these tubes, people are doing all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But what about a more accessible way to adapt to the 6SN7 tube? Well, Charles has, in the next segment, some good ideas for you. Okay, what have you got for us, Charles?
Okay, well, we looked at this 9-pin to octal adapter earlier, and it is really useful for doing some very interesting things. So I believe this is using what's called the 9AJ pin standard, which is used by a huge number of 6-volt 9-pin tubes that are out there. And if you adapt it over to using the same pin standard as the 6SN7, you can actually use a whole bunch of tubes in the place of a 6SN7. So right here we've got 4 different 6CG7 types, and one of the reasons why we're talking about this today is that we've actually been slowly restocking these guys. We've sold out of almost all of them, and we've finally been getting some more of them back in. And here we have one of the famous RCA clear tops. Just like with the 12AU7 variants, these are well-regarded tubes. They can be finicky for us to source because they, like with any vintage high-demand tube, it's hard to find good testing ones that haven't been picked over first. But we do have some beautiful pairs of them in. Unfortunately, I think all we have are good used, or they may have been new old stock, but we just can't tell, so we're selling them as good used, but they're testing really quite good. And the 6CG7s, of course, are just a 6SN7 in a 9-pin bottle. That's what they were designed to do. They were meant to match the specs perfectly. And here we have a Matsushita made one. Matsushita, of course, made them in Japan, and they're also well known for being for using a lot of Phillips/Muller tooling, although I don't think they use them on these.
So when you say they're compatible, do you mean that there's no electrical differences between the 6CG7 and the 6SN7?
No, you can use it in any space where a 6SN7 was designed for with one of these adapters.
With the right adapter. And
With
you
the right
got
adapter.
to be careful about adapters. I warned you before, I think twice. But there's a lot of adapters that sort of look like the right adapter, but they're not.
Yeah, they might have a different pinout internally or a switch that they've done on them. Now here's an NEC, and these are fun because we've been really getting into NEC tubes lately, especially with their link to Western Electric. And so we've been sourcing more NEC 6CG7s, and we have enough in to make some beautiful matched pairs of them. And they sound really quite good. One feature that all these Japanese variants have is that they have a very clean, crisp, and detailed sound to them, with small variants in warmth and where that warmth is focused. And the NEC, the Toshiba, the Matsushita, they all sound really quite good. Here's a Toshiba one right here. And these are all just fantastic tubes. We're happy we've been able to get some more of them in. So these will run in a Freya, in anything that is running a 6SN7. And speaking of the Freya, it can actually run some more stuff. So you might be familiar with something called the Freya N or the Freya Novel. And the Freya Novel just took a standard Freya and they put a 9-pin socket in it. Then they said it was compatible with a bunch of these 9-pin tubes. This is a 6N1P EV, one of our favorite preamp tubes. Same one that we built the gain stage of the rocket around. Here's a 6922 made by Sylvania after they were purchased by Philips. So this is pretty late production. That's a 6DJ8 type. And here's a 6N6P, one of our favorite cathode follower tubes, but also great sounding as a preamp. And all three of these tubes, using this adapter, can actually run inside a Freya, as if you were running it as a Freya Novel. So it gives you all sorts of options that you can run.
Now, there are some limits because of the filament current supply of the Freya, and Charles has put a chart up showing the compatibility of all 4 tubes so that you can decide on what combination will work and what combination you shouldn't use.
Most of them are safe. The big thing you have to watch out for are the 6N6Ps. They draw a lot more current than a standard 6SN7. So if you're running a pair of these in either stage, you can't run 4 of them. You can run 2 of them with a lower current tube like a 6N1P or 6922, I believe. But check the chart to make sure. And if you're interested in doing some rolling of some very different tubes, this really opens up a whole new world for you.
And as we head to a period in which it's getting harder and harder to find quality inventory of quality vintage 6SN7s, and in fact, many of the better types are essentially either endangered now or have gone extinct. Being able to adapt across an excellent, let's say, 9-pin tube that's a little bit more available, that it just opens up such an improved amount of options.
And this is just a small selection of what you can get here. There's huge varieties of 6CG7s and 6922s out there. And even these old guys.
And crazy things like this, that work, when we first brought this in, we thought, that can't work well. There's just no way. And yeah, it does. It sounds amazing. So if you like the sound of earlier tubes, then adapting something like the CV6 family across to a 6SN7, I think you're going to be really surprised at the results. And none of these tubes are in the stratosphere, so they're all reasonably affordable. Yeah. So well done, Charles. So thanks for bringing us up to date on all of that. And do we have anything new that came in this week?
Well, mostly these 6CG7s. So we've got nice matched pairs of each of these ones that are up here. Of course, all these different variants, the 6N1P, the 6922, and the 6N6P we've got plenty of as well. And we've got more stuff in the testing lineup to bring to you next week. And I think something else is coming up soon.
Yeah, talking about next week. Next week is the annual summer sale. Starts on next Friday. And Charles, what are the dates? Can you see them on our schedule board there behind me?
Oh, let me check. Looks like it's going to be June 13th to the 23rd.
Yeah, so Friday, June the 13th to Monday, June the 23rd, will be the summer sale. If you are a returning customer, you'll get an email from us. We only send out 2, maybe 3 emails a year. So if you get one from us on Thursday or Friday, that's the email. And basically, it's 15% off the entire store. And the only exclusion to that are gift certificates and the kit amps. The kit amps just have such a tight margin that we just can't discount them. And if you're
anxious and you don't want to wait until then, well,
there
we've
are
got some discount codes.
some cheers codes you can use. Now, you can't double code on the summer sale. It's just 15% off is just, it's the maximum discount we ever give on anything. And it hurts big time, but a lot of our good returning customers will take advantage of it and stock up on stuff, particularly the more expensive tubes that they really, struggle to afford. So 15% is a big chunk of money saved. And next week, we're going to look at some of the inventory of some of those tubes so you have an idea of what's still available. And we can reach almost everybody around the world with $20 flat rate shipping. But if your order is $150 or more after discount, the shipping is on us, folks. And of course, during the sale week, the $150 rule applies. So you can get free shipping and 15% off. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.